Okay. Before I start, I just want to make sure that, okay, we're moving. Okay. Hi, everyone. So as we get started here, this is WestCOG's Stormwater Infrastructure Mapping Project. We're really excited to share with you what we have planned today. We've been working all summer on this project. Before I get kind of deeper into this, I just want to introduce ourselves. So you can take a look at that the bottom circles right there. We're going to go from left to right. So actually, yeah, we'll go left to right. So first off, we have Chris, blonde hair in the corner over there. That's Chris Lilly. He is a rising senior at UCONN Stores studying geographic information science. Next to him is me. I'm Nate Hoffert, your current presenter right now. I am a rising sophomore at UCONN Stores studying landscape architecture. And right next to me is Kat Manning. She is a rising senior at UCONN Stores studying geography and political science. Also in the little circle, but not with us today, is Tucker Bennett. He is a senior data scientist here at WestCOG, and he was our project coordinator. So great work, Tucker, and we're really excited to share with you guys. So without further ado, let's get started. So my fellow presenters are going to really get into the heart of what this entire project entails, but I'm going to lay out a bit of an introduction for you guys so you can kind of understand what's going to go on over the next 20 minutes. So for starters, some of you might have heard of the MS4 permits passed down from the EPA and eventually passed by state law. They required certain municipalities, well, most municipalities, to have their stormwater systems mapped. So that includes all the features you see on the side of the road. Those are catch basins, drains, and outfalls. These are unfiltered water that just comes flying off the road during the storms. They prevent erosion, and they do great things. However, a lot of municipalities in the state, especially within WestCOG, did not finish all the mapping that they needed to finish. So WestCOG took over and they hired us, 3 happy interns from UCONN Stores, to take over, and we were very excited. So we'll talk a little bit about the project needed mission, then we'll talk a little bit about our statistics. We all love numbers. We'll talk a little bit about the process and what every day of fieldwork looked like. And then we'll talk a little bit about costs, and we'll talk about some challenges we faced and also some anecdotes we have from the field. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over. Well, not. So we're all gonna, I'm gonna have Chris explain some of this too, because he's gonna jump into this slide. But this is actually a lovely drawing by Tucker Bennett and Nick and Mike in our office. And this is essentially, we actually added this last minute because we wanted to show you guys kind of how a network looks. Like, forget all about points and maps and GIS and all that. Let's just talk about markers on whiteboards like it's 2005 and we're in math class. So we understand that the water enters in the catch basins, so you can kind of see that there. Once the water enters, it'll slide through the drainage pipe to another catch basin, usually, before eventually leading to an outfall off of the road. That's pretty simple. As you can see, there's also culverts, which are essentially streams under roads. That's basically what we're talking about, but I'll have Chris finish up anything else and move us on to the next slide. Chris?
Pretty much. No, you pretty much, Nate pretty much knocked it out of the park. This is basically just the system that we're working with. Did you discuss outfalls?
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, we're just going to go through these catch basins on the road, the drainage pipes, and we're going to create a network from it using back-end data and on ArcGIS
Oh my
Pro.
God.
But this is basically just what we're working with, just a little diagram. I have to click. That's my bad. Sorry, 1 second. All right, talking about the project need and mission. Basically, the reason why we were doing this is because the towns only had 40 to 60% of map data, and this is a town requirement for them to have 100% of the drainage network data. And WestCOG is an entity designed to help these towns with these issues, so that's why we wanted to go out and get the rest of this data that hasn't been mapped yet in a cost-effective way and in an efficient manner, which is why we hired 3 UCONN students to do this. We figured that'd be pretty nice. But basically, yeah, we just needed to fill out the data that they haven't collected yet. So we were trying to finish that all up and go through the different towns. I'm gonna hand it to you hand it over to Kat for statistics.
So I'm gonna do like a general overview of the statistics from this summer. So between the 3 interns, the 3 of us, we each mapped about 100 basins per day per person, so 300 total per day. And then like grand totals for the summer, we have about 10,000 features mapped. This was across 3, maybe heading into a 4th town in the WestCOG area. And this project took 3 months. We started at the end of May, and we're going to go through August 18th for a total cost of around $25,000. Project process. Back to you, Chris.
All right. I'm here to talk about the project process now. So here are the areas that we've mapped on a state of Connecticut. As you can see, and we have a little WestCOG outline for the towns that they covered. So we covered a good bit of it. You can see that's a lot of features that have been mapped. We currently finished New Milford, Brookfield, and we're just about to complete Reading and going on to Weston, I believe. So that's just overall the work that we've done. The resources that we've needed for this project, you can see in the first photo on the left. We have a clipboard with a map that's handed out to us by a coordinator showing us the areas that we need to cover for the catch basins. Next to it is a flashlight that we use to look into the catch basins and get the pipe. We can see the pipes in there and the materials. The tape measure is to measure the diameter to it, so then we can later on connect each pipe to each other. And we also have a safety vest. Obviously, we're going to be out in the road a lot, so we want to be highly visible and seen so cars don't like run us over. And for transportation, we just use cars to go to every location. And we basically just go to a general area, park it somewhere, and then walk out and map the catch basins and track them on our maps using a pen, making sure we've covered each area. All right, for software, it was this was an app created using Survey123. It is very easy to use, and all you need is a phone or a computer with internet access or cellular data. And this was created by Tucker, and it only took a few days to make and test out all the bugs. And it's very, like I said, it's very simple to use. All you just need is to go to the website, and right here on the right, you can see the image right here of all the data that we've mapped. We have 9,346 total records, and you can see which days had more than others, and which days we spent inside, of course, too. All right, hand it over to Kat for the demo.
So I'm going to walk you through how we would use this survey as we would approach a catch basin. I did this about 3,000 times, so I'm pretty familiar with it. So the first thing that the survey wants, and so there's a web version on the left, which is also mobile friendly, and the app version on the right, so like both of them are pretty similar. But when you open the survey, the first thing it wants is the actual location of basin, and you can use your phone's location. We found that that wasn't super precise, especially on the app version. It would give you about like a 25-meter radius, which, you know, there could be many catch basins within 25 meters, so you'd want to be more precise. And zooming into the actual catch basin, like you see on the right there, this is actually our office. And getting as precise, like actually putting the pin right on top of the basin, was the most helpful. So you want to have your basin marked basically exactly where it is, or your outfall. Most of what we did was basins, but there were some outfalls. Then the second part, and this is, I think, the most fun, is when you actually survey the inside of the basin. And typically there is between, I would say, 1 to 4 pipes. And we're looking for the direction of the pipe, the diameter, and the material, which is usually corrugated plastic, concrete, or corrugated metal. Sometimes you have some other stuff, but those are basically the 3 materials that your pipe would be made out of. And so we have a sample here. Can I click the grade? Okay, so normally you wouldn't be able to take off the grade, it's too heavy, but in this case, you know, special exception. So I would say we use clock bearings to identify like the direction of the pipe, since you know, the catch basins are all at different angles, so compass bearings would be a little bit less helpful. So 12 would be facing the road, 6 would be facing the curb, and then 3 and 9 on the sides. So I would say to survey this basin, we have a 16-inch pipe already been measured for us, but normally you'd have to measure that with the tape measure. 16-inch pipe at 12 o'clock, and we have a 13-inch pipe at 3 o'clock. At 6 o'clock, it looks like we have a 7-inch pipe. Now, typically these smaller pipes would be private. Anything less than 12 inches in diameter is private, and we weren't responsible for mapping those, but it could be useful. And then at 9 o'clock, it looks like we have a 13-inch pipe that has a blockage, which is Luigi, but would normally be like a large stone or something. Sometimes you'd find blocked pipes. And I would jot down this information as well, but also like write that it's looks to be no longer in use. So that is the main point of the survey, but then you also have additional notes. Sometimes there's blockages, or sometimes we wouldn't be able to read a basin because it was covered, the surface grate was covered by leaves, which we'll get into a little bit later. And also collecting the name and the date for the metadata. And I'm going to hand it off to Nate for post-processing.
Hi, it's me again. So post-processing data. So once we have all this information that's collected out in the field, of course, we have to do something with it since it's only raw data. So as you can see here on the left, you see a Survey 123 map. That's what it looks like when it's just raw data. And then you see the ArcGIS map, and that is finished, completed data. So to get from one to the other, what we do, or what our data coordinator often does, is we have to actually go to ArcGIS and create lines between the pipes, and of course give those lines attributes. So usually those includes pipe materials, diameters, also metadata like who created it, what was the date, so that the towns know when we took it, when we went out there, and all that other stuff along with source, of course. And once we take this, we start to go from just a bunch of points on the map to a really nice completed sewage map that often reminds me of the little, like connect the dots things that you did when you were younger. It's very satisfying, and it's also very useful. So that's what it looks like in post-processing data. Usually that's a day at the office using a laptop or some other tool as such. So obviously, there are thousands of catch basins and other features to be mapped. So in order to complete this successfully, we had our data coordinator, Tucker. He printed out all these lovely maps from 2016 planimetric data, and he organized them for us in a grid map. And then what he would do usually is small circle sections and hand them off to each of us. So he would overlook us while he was in the office and we were out in the field, and he'd kind of coordinate what we were all doing. And when we were out in the field, we just scratched off with a pen or whatever our system was. And usually we covered about 2 field maps per week. To give you an idea, usually the largest town we had was New Milford, and we had about 3 weeks of maps. So probably about 9 maps total, because we split it up into subsections. So that's a really big town. Smaller towns like Reading are usually 2 weeks. So that's kind of an idea of how we tracked all this completion. And then back to Chris for some safety considerations.
All right, real quick, I'm going to talk about some safety that we conducted out in the field. So we were talking before about that highly reflective vest. Obviously, it's important for other cars to see you. You're going to be on a lot of roads. And generally, we just use your own discretion when discussing which roads or streets to do and which ones not to do. We avoid very busy highways or state highways. And anything that looks too busy or maybe too narrow to walk on, we just don't even do. If we need that information, we could go contact the town and they can get that later. And just some other things that are important to know. Obviously, to move out of the road when inputting data, it's an easy thing to forget. Sometimes you'll just be on your phone putting in the data and you'll be in the street. You don't want to be like a sitting duck for anyone. And general areas that were off limits included schools, churches, and major highways. They can give us that data later if we ask for it. All right, I'll hand it over to Kat for a day of field work.
Okay. Did it stop sharing?
Oh.
No, you're good.
Okay. Okay, so this would be a typical day in the field. And this was honestly most of our summer, just being out in the field. Sorry, I'm just trying to get to the next slide. Okay. So we typically have 7-hour work days and work 35 hours a week. This is a little bit flexible depending on like the weather situations and such. I like to start earlier in the day, around 7:38 when it would get hot. I would try to start earlier because we had a pretty nice June and July, but then towards the end of July and August, it started to get really hot and our productivity changed from that. And then work for a few hours. This also depends on like what type of neighborhood you have for the day. If you have something that's more dense, there's a lot of roads close together, it might make sense to work for a longer amount of time and then go back to your car for a break after that whole section is done, versus a more sparse neighborhood where there's long roads and few catch basins. You're going to be in your car more to travel between those distances, so more frequent breaks are needed. It's also a weather dependent thing. The heat really affects our productivity. And typically the day would end between 3 and 4. So that would be an example of a good weather day when it would be appropriate to be out in the field. But on poor weather days, which when it was like raining all day or too hot, I think we set our threshold at 95 degrees, but it never got that hot this summer. We'd be in the office doing the back end work of connecting the dots. This ended up being about 1 to 2 times per month, but we felt that this wasn't enough because we'd be on our third town for doing the field mapping, but then like still on our first town for doing the back end work. So perhaps like set days could be better, but we decided it would just be more weather dependent. And we were thinking that if this project were to be expanded in the future, since we did both halves of this work, that's totally possible. But if you wanted to have like a dedicated field worker and a dedicated online mapper, a better ratio would be like 3 to 1 for that. And here is a screenshot of the work that I completed in New Milford on June 28th. You can see about like just a visual representation of the area that I got done. This was 101 catch basins, so I would say this is like an average to above average days productivity. And I got a little bit of the downtown section done and then some more like rural roads. Yeah, this is pretty average for what we could complete in a day. And now we're going to break it down into the cost.
So let's talk a little bit about program costs. So like we said, the total cost was about $24,520. Let's start to break that down. So again, there's 3 of us, 3 interns. That was about just over $7,000 for labor and supplies for all of us for all 12 weeks. And then included in this $25,000 cost, we also reimburse mileages for the interns. So that's about 65 cents per mile in summer 2023. And when we add about 500 miles per month for each intern across 3 months, that's about $3,000 total. So it was pretty reasonable. Like I said, all under 25K, which is pretty good in our opinion for completing all this work. And then let's talk a little bit about where that money came from. So a lot of the money came from specific commissions, but we also got a little bit out of state and federal transportation funds. So because this is a mandated project and towns had to complete this, we weren't, eligible to receive most grants. So most of our funding sources came from the HB-MPO and the SW-MPO. Some of you are familiar with that. They're federally mandated organizations for planning and economic development for their respective regions. So WestCOG is made up of 2 of them. And like I said, towns in the north like Reading, New Milford, Brookfield all came from the HB-MPO, whereas towns in the south that will hit at the end of the summer, such as Wilton, they're in the SW-MPO. So that's where the main portion of our funding came from for this project. All right, I'm going to hand this presentation off again.
All right, I'm back again to discuss some challenges that we face in the field. So for starters, the weather, I think we touched on it a couple of times. Obviously in the summer in Connecticut, it's going to get very, very hot, which can impact productivity. A lot of days is some of them can be a lot slower than others, let's just say, because you'll be taking a lot more breaks. You'll be out there sweating, all that. It's important to have water and sunscreen and all that. Parking is another issue. Sometimes the roads are very narrow and it can be very difficult to find good parking, or it's very far away from the catch basin, so that can take longer to walk to and analyze. And the features are also spread apart with this, so it can take a really long time to walk between each catch basin, which can impact productivity. And another thing too is that in the areas that we're working there's a lot of hills and a lot of busy roads, which can take a really long time to walk through. I mean, going up a hill at 90 degrees Fahrenheit can be really difficult. And another thing to take into account is catch basin obstructions. Sometimes they'll be blocked by leaves, debris, dirt, gravel, and it can be very hard to move. Like I'll try to move them with my feet, but sometimes it doesn't work. So we're not able to get that data. So we just have to do our best guess or just say we couldn't get the data for this, which can also be another challenge if we don't have that. Interacting with residents. People are understandably concerned about what you're doing in their neighborhood. You're walking through, taking a flashlight, looking through their catch basins. So people are going to have questions and they're going to come up to you and talk to you. So some important things that we would take away from this is that we're going to involve public works every time we go to these towns. Just notify them what we're doing, what our job is, all that. Have official badges and IDs. We didn't get ours till like mid-June, and that really helped, I would say. People, like, once they saw that, they would like know your name. They would be a lot more friendly instead of like more confrontational, I would say. It's important too when talking to de-escalate the possible situations, obviously like be professional about it. And it's important to note private roads and complexes can be really tricky sometimes. People don't really expect that, and it's not part of the town. So they'll have a lot of questions for you, but we still go through and try and get the data where we can. And we also offer to report any problems in the area and ask for feedback. I've had a couple of situations where people complain of flooding, so I put that on the app, and town can go through and fix that. So overall, this will go to everyone, but some overall lessons learned, I would say it's definitely important. I think the identification badges are huge. It's important to have. Without them, it was a lot more trickier, like you'll get a lot more confrontational. But I also want to highlight that it wasn't really that often. It wasn't like people were always hostile coming out and yelling at us and things like that. It was very few and far between, but it's important to keep a professional mindset. And here's just some pictures. These are some animals that we literally saw out in the field that we took pictures of, thought it looked cool. You'll be dealing with like deer and snakes probably like every day or every so often. Do you guys want to add anything? Or?
So I think like one of my main takeaways this summer in terms of like something positive is that it was really cool to be able to explore towns in this way where you're going through like every street and you're just seeing like things that you would never normally see. And, you know, being outside, we had great weather overall this summer. It was really nice to be outside. I'm trying to like promote the idea of like field collection. But it was like, this was really cool to just not be in an office every single day. And yeah, if anyone is trying to replicate this project, even like going out for a week and like collecting data, I would recommend it because these residential neighborhoods are often really nice. And yeah, I saw a lot of deer this summer, no bears. I was warned by several residents that I was going to run into bears and they were going to eat me, but that didn't end up happening, luckily. But yeah, yeah, I just saw a lot of really cool animals, met really cool people with experiences, that a lot of former government employees who wanted to tell me all about their neighborhoods. And yeah, I had some awesome experiences this summer that I definitely wouldn't have at any other job. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah. So yeah, kind of adding on to Kat, you know, I think a lot of times, especially Western Connecticut, can get grouped into the New York metropolitan area, and people are just like, it's just an extension of New York, which is silly, of course, and you all know that. But this was really, it was almost like, in a way, it was like studying abroad, but in your home, because I live here in Western Connecticut, and it was really personable to just see all the people, like meet people you've never met before, and really see a side of Connecticut that I don't really think gets, you know, often kind of shown, but it's really pretty, really beautiful. There's some great people, great restaurants. I mean, you have to remember almost like 90% of Connecticut is forested, and, you know, it's very beautiful woods and just so much character. At one point, I'm in New Milford, near the tip of Candlewood Lake, and I'm just on like the edge of a farm on the top of a hill, just kind of like, you know, with my tape measure doing my thing. And all of a sudden I feel my bones start to literally rattle. And behind me, I see a vintage, like 1960s sort of plane, like the classic, like two-wing kind of like propeller plane just taking off, like just like 100 feet away from me. Turns out it was a small grass strip up in New Milford. And it was just things like that that are just really pretty to see. And you don't really see them often. So it was really cool to get personable with Connecticut. And I do hope that whether they're mapping storm drains or simply just reconnecting with their hometown, I do hope that people can really see that Western Connecticut has a lot to offer in our region. It's a really lovely region.
All right. So for what we would do better next time, definitely more time for back-end work. I think Kat mentioned it earlier. Having like dedicated online mappers would really help. You're gonna have over our summer, we had 10,000 features mapped. That's a lot for one person and a lot to ask, you know, like for us to just come in every now and then when it rains. I definitely think it would be an improvement to have either set days for field work and office work or have more dedicated online mappers. And having a shovel to clear catch basins. I know giving college students a shovel might not be the greatest idea in the world, but we figured something small and retractable would be really good for clearing the catch basins of debris so we can get that information clearly instead of just having to say unknown or best guess. And possibly safety equipment for cars, probably like hazard signs or magnets or maybe even cones, something reflective to show the people like where we're parking and what we're doing. This would allow more access, more ideas for us to go in parks in places that we otherwise couldn't before. And it would mitigate a lot of the parking issues. So we would be able to get more catch basins mapped in a quicker time. And the last thing is AI applications. I'm not really too good in this field, but with the advent of like ChatGPT and a bunch of other AI software, it is interesting to note how we can incorporate that into this project to make it more efficient or maybe even automated to create the drainage networks. I don't really know too much about it, but it's just an open-ended question. I think it's interesting to talk about. But besides that, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to come to this presentation. You can reach us at this emails if you have any questions or concerns.
All right, nice work.
So we have about 10 minutes if anybody has questions.
Yeah.
We gotta turn our volume up. We can't hear anybody. Hold on. You turn the volume on that, the mic off on that.
Yeah.
We'll talk through this. All right, let's try that again. Oh no, still gonna be silent. Here we go, one more time. All right, we're ready for questions now.
I actually have a question. This is Tracy from East Hartford. Hi. I was thinking I needed to do some field work, and I just did like the preliminary collection on my cell phone, and it's so off from like the actual real world location. Did you guys ever look into like devices? Because I've like to boost the GPS power of your like mobile devices or anything. Was that ever an option for you guys?
Yeah, you're free to this.
Yeah, so that was one thing that we felt that we could also look into possibly if we're gonna do this again next summer. I ended up, so on the app, it gives you the option to either, like you said, just have your phone's location music, which wasn't accurate. Or you can just search in the street name that you're on and it'll put you on the street and then you just zoom into the catch basin from there. And that is a solution that worked best for me. Like I basically use that all the time. But yeah, definitely you could also think about having some sort of GPS attachment that could make your location more precise for sure.
And I'll chime in. At WestCOG, we do have some dongles that we bought, and it kind of brings the phone up to like a high-end GPS accuracy for like for a phone, not for but I'd certainly be something like Bad Elf tools, give them a little plug, or like some dedicated tool that's really meant for getting good accuracy. That'd probably help a lot, I'm sure. And we also funded their data plans, like they, just because a little stipend on some of their data services. So we recognize that they'd be using a lot of data, trying to get those GPS connections. But yeah, most of it seemed like they were plotting on the ground visually.
Yeah, I've done the MS4 collection, and you can't see every catch basin because of the trees on the photos. So I was just curious on the aerials. So I was just curious. Thanks, guys. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I see Michael with a hand up.
Hey guys, nice job. Very professional and crisp presentation. One question I had, so I'm here with UMass Amherst Campus Planning, and I guess I have a whole bunch of questions, so I might bug you offline. But one question right out of the gates is what's next for this data that you prepared? How are you guys working with WestCOG and the individual municipalities to take this data and run with it?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So we hired the interns to help the towns meet that 100% target they have to get to meet the state mandate. So beyond that, that was kind of their purpose and mission. For WestCOG side of things, where our goal is to build a functional network for the community so they can know what outfalls are associated with what storm drains. So if they go and do their testing of an outfall and they find contaminated water, they know for certain what's feeding into that outfall. So that's kind of the whole purpose of the stormwater permit. Right now, we're just building lines and dots and connecting them that way. But ultimately, it would also be really cool to make some kind of directional flow if you wanted to do drainage simulations and use it that way. But right now, we're just trying to get that network built.
So I guess along those lines, I'll just ask one other question, and then I'll let others chime in. You mentioned you didn't have police details and you were staying out of the main road. So Did you have any maps, existing maps, utility maps to work off of? And what were you doing about manholes as opposed to catch basins, manholes and trunk lines that those catch basins were feeding into?
So I'll probably answer this one too. We have a good collection of manhole data from a planometrics data set that we got. So we had an idea of where the catchments are and the manholes. Manholes were not investigated, so those were left alone. And was there another part to that question?
No, I think you covered it. So you did have some sort of map that you were building off of.
All these little blue squares are the catch basins. And so that's how, it was in the presentation, but that's how we knew where the data was. Sometimes there would be missing data, but this was pretty accurate. And also most of the other towns, not Reading, would have outfall data mapped as well. So we had a lot to go off of, but we were just trying to collect more data based on the catch basins and outfalls besides their location.
Okay.
And there was some municipal data that we had at the ready too, but we still had them check it because we found that it wasn't necessarily always accurate.
Right,
So-
right. That was my first thought. All right. Well, I'll let others.
double-checked.
I'll let others chime in, but thank you guys again, and I'll probably be pinging you offline.
Now you can reach out to Tucker Beckett. He's going to be your best point of contact to get answers and follow-ups. All right, Rebecca, you got a hand up.
Yeah, my question was similar to what Michael had, asking about the manhole. So it sounds like you guys just kind of identified that there was a manhole there, possibly a connection, and then we'll do a further investigation either on let the town know or whatever that may be. But then my other question is, when do you expect to have the data ready? I know you guys said you started up north and then you're working your way down south. Just kind of looking to know when that data would be ready, in particular for New Milford, as they're one of our clients. So we just want to reach out to them too.
Oh, great. So the post-processing, I think for the data will probably be done in a month or two with the existing data. Tucker will have to be doing that himself, but there's also demand for this service. We're thinking about actually hiring more interns in the fall. I guess I don't know if they'd be interns at that point, but hiring technicians to do the mapping, to keep going out there and collecting data all the way up till probably early December, just to blow it out and get it done, because it's going much faster than we ever anticipated. So the Milford network will probably be ready in a few months, probably by the end of the year for sure. And for the other towns, we're exploring, but we're planning on speeding that up. I don't know how long it'll take ultimately. If we did 3 towns this summer, right? Yeah. And there's probably 10 towns to do total, so it'd take a year and a half to probably get the whole thing done, I guess, if we really went at it.
Thank you. Great job, guys.
Thank you. Any other questions out there for the stormwater mappers? The chat. Oh, great job. Thanks, Jenny. Good warning. Okay. Yeah, overall, it was a very low cost effort. And I don't know if they mentioned this before, but I don't know if you caught it, but we what are the dongles? I actually forgot the name of them. I don't know off the top of my head. But we applied for a grant probably like 2 years ago for this project, and it got shot down. And then there were other grants we were applying for, and it got shut down where it started because of the state mandate. They're like, we're not going to fund something the towns have to do. They want to fund innovative, new ways to get the job done. So then we kept struggling to figure out how to do it. And then we said, this stuff's in the road. Why don't we just fund it with our transportation planning dollars and provide a nice service for the towns? We were worried that it was going to be really slow and laborious. It's laborious. They're out there in the heat every day collecting, 300 data points a day, but it moves quicker than you think. And this blew away all our expectations. Oh, thanks, Nick. Yeah, that's the dongle. All right. So that I guess that kind of concludes our section. We probably do one more question, but looks like we're ready to segue to the next presentation tonight, I guess. The 25,000 your team was super productive. Kudos. Oh, thanks, David. Yeah, it was a really good intern project for sure.
All right. Next up, we'll hear from Jennifer Palchik. Sorry, I'm really bad at names. From UCONN, who will be presenting on guardrail planning and data management.
Hey everyone. All right, let me just share my screen here. Okay. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Jen Pawalczyk. I work at the Connecticut Transportation Safety Research Center at UConn, and I'm the GIS database programmer and admin there. We work heavily in partnership with the Connecticut DOT, and the project that I'm going to show you today is guardrail planning and data management for the Connecticut DOT. Okay, so just a quick agenda of the things that I'm planning to go over. We have the guardrail inventory and the process we went through to collect that. The planning application, which is kind of how we're planning to keep the inventory updated. We'll go over a demo of the application, talk about some current development, and then at the end we'll have time for questions. So for the inventory and data development, we're starting really at square one. And here you can see is an example of how the initial data we had for this project was stored. The data steward at the DOT had years of purchase orders and an access database, and he was kind of keeping them in here. So after every construction season, he would go through, pull out anything that had been constructed, and this had some really useful information in here. So we had the route ID, the directions, so the side of the road that the guardrail was on, mile point information, description information, all kinds of really useful information, but it wasn't spatial, it was just tabular. And it wasn't really like he was able to go through every year and say, okay, this was removed in this location and this was added. It was mostly just compiling everything that was in the overall inventory. So as the first phase of this project, what we were tasked with was turning this all into spatial data. What we're able to do to accomplish that was we use the linear referencing system, so the LRS, the roadway information, to match up the route and the mile points, the direction of the road, and get generalized areas where the guardrails are supposed to be in the inventory. And they were offset, I believe, like 25 or 30 feet from the center line of the road. So not in the totally accurate location, but the best we could do based off of kind of what we had to get started with. And what we decided to do with the data here is take it from just one spreadsheet and put it into two different feature classes based off of what existed in here. So they had both the guardrail information, so the main body of the guardrail that you see when you're driving down the road, and then the end treatments that kind of attach it into the ground on either side and anchor it. So if we take a look here, this is what our data model looked like as we were getting started. So we had our guide rails and end treatments, both are polyline feature classes. The guide rails have a unique identifier of an INVID, which initially came out of that access database. It was the inventory ID. What we did moving forward was each individual one had its own number, and we created a trigger on the data. So as our editors were going through, because we had a team of student editors at UConn and some help from VHB as well. They were going through and moving all of the guardrails from the center line of the road to the actual location. This started at the beginning of 2020, and we were using the 2019 ortho imagery. So really not a lag between the time that they were going through and digitizing and when the imagery had been captured to the correct location. So we added a database trigger in here. So anytime they were creating a new feature, it was getting a new inventory ID. So in cases where something hadn't been captured in the initial inventory and they were adding it in, that information would be there. This is version data, since we had a team of editors working on it. It's just helpful to for database management. And we had a status field in there, so you can kind of see the plan, so the future rails in the system, commissioned, what currently exists, and decommissioned, so anything historically that's been removed or replaced. But if you're looking at something, maybe a crash that's happened in the past, you can look at what was there at the time. For the end treatments, also a polyline feature class. These are using a unique identifier of an asset ID, which is also running based off of a trigger, but then they also have the related identifier of the INVID number of the guide rail, so that you can see that relationship both spatially and in a tabular view if you need to. It also makes it a lot easier in your web maps and pop-ups to just pull that information in and show everything is related. These are also versioned and utilize a status field, so you can see, again, the planned, commissioned, and decommissioned assets here as well. This image here shows just one small piece of a very large portion of how we determined we were going to lay out the digitizing here. And this evolved as the project did. It was, I think, just a little bit over 2 years of all of the data management to get it to the place where it is now, where they're using it for their assets. So going from that tabular spreadsheet to having spatial data, to having things that are correctly located, and modeling out exactly how the leading trailing end treatment is going to be, the body of the guardrail, the trailing end treatment, what they wanted to do over bridges, since bridges aren't technically guardrails, but they are a barrier on the side of the road. So determining how they wanted to show and classify that data, all kinds of things that didn't totally appear off the surface at the start of the project, but as I'm sure most of you know, when you take on a large scope of a project, there are questions that come up and things that you have to solve for as it's ongoing. So one big example of that is also phase 2 of this digitizing project. So once everything was correctly located spatially, we were going through all the new assets the students had collected in the time that they were doing the digitizing, and it was a very large number, to the point of where there were several assets that weren't identified by type. And we spoke with the data steward, and he said, it would be really much more helpful to us if we knew the full scope of our inventory and we had all of the different types that were out there, because that's the whole point of the project, right? Not to know how many feet of something you have, but to know the types when you're looking to replace or do upgrades in certain areas. So our data steward created a data dictionary. I think it was like 70 or 80 pages of different pictures of guardrails and the most common types throughout the state. We gave it to our student editors, and they went through, and anywhere where there wasn't a type identified on the guardrail, so they were using attribute filtering to kind of go through and going through the different routes along the state and going through and actually identifying anything that hadn't been previously identified using both imagery from the DOT, so using Mapillary and Google Street View as well. Here, there was a little bit more data refinement as well, so kind of determining when a guardrail goes from a state road to a local road, how we want to handle that and how far we want to draw the digitization. And in some instances, reclassing, saying locally maintained hardware or something of that nature. So this was quite a large undertaking to just get everything started. And with that complete, all the manual digitization, the identifying of assets, the quality control, that kind of brings us to the second phase of the project, and trying to determine how we don't lose all of that work of collecting the initial inventory. So that brought us to the planning process, which we knew was going to happen from the start of the project, but kind of brought it into a fuller scope of, we really don't want to lose this information because there has been some lag in the time that the data was initially created in the inventory and to when the planning process has been just about fully implemented now. We did have to do a little bit of manual review of pulling purchase orders, even through the time that students were digitizing, to go through and update anything manually. So to eliminate that, they had a request for a planning application. And so to give you some scope of the initial business requirements, what the DOT was looking for was for the planners in the different districts of the state. The state has 4 planning districts, so 4 different planners that would be focused on guardrails as part of the scope of their work. They would go in and select a project area based out of a web map and say, this is the area I'm looking to replace this year. And they could take the existing features and use those for their basis of planning new or replacement barriers. And then from that planning, they would get a cost estimate per item and then a final roll up of the total project cost, which would look similar to this. So all of the different pieces that they were going to have to plan out, they would have a line item for, they would have the number of how much of each type, the cost, the final cost, and then the total breakdown of what it's going to cost to perform the work on that project area. So we said, that's great. And we tried in Web App Builder, the cost analysis tool, which would have been really great for this project if we could have used it, because essentially you can set all your different types of guardrails. You can set the cost on the back end for each thing. We had a mock-up version to get started with, and the planners would go through, select their project area, copy everything that was there in the commissioned status and set it to planned. They could edit their links. They could merge things together if they wanted to, or move things out that they didn't want to include in the project, whatever it might be, and get the calculation estimates per item using this cost analysis tool. There would definitely be some manual work on the back end to do all of the setting for everything, but at a first glance, this seemed like a really good solution for this project. So as we kind of got a little bit more in depth with the planning process and saw the actual cost calculation sheet of how they go through and all of the behind the scenes work that happens, when we kind of started meeting with the planners and seeing everything that goes into it, we realized that that initial tool in Web App Builder just wasn't dynamic enough to meet the needs of what this specific project was looking to entail. And mostly that's because of the spreadsheet here. So the way we initially had it set up, the planners would select their overall guardrail type. So for this, we'll say it's RB Mesh. But in reality, when the planners are going through, an RB Mesh guardrail might be made of all these different post spacing possibilities. It could have different section types. It could have different end treatments. The list goes on and on. And to add to the complication of that, the pricing could differentiate between how much linear footage they're having to order. So if the more they order, they get a small discount for some of the contractors. So that initial tool just wasn't going to work for this specific use case. So we had to kind of figure out a solution for all of these needs. And what that ended up being is a costing calculation model. The DOT has set up a enterprise portal, and so they have SQL on the back end that they're able to use with their feature classes. And so what we did is we set up using Survey 123 a spreadsheet similar but different to this, where they're going to enter in a bunch of answers to all the different questions that they would on this initial spreadsheet. The information that comes out of that goes into this costing calculation to give them the output that they would have to be doing pretty much manually in the Excel spreadsheet. And what's nice about Survey 123 is we're able to run some pretty basic calculations in there to give them a generalized idea of what the cost is going to be as they answer each question. And then this calculation will run on the back end and actually give like the breakdowns of everything. So if they're going to get a discount because they're ordering 600 linear feet of something, that'll be reflected in the costing calculation because it's taking everything that they enter for an entire project into consideration. Whereas in Survey 123, we're just kind of looking at each individual line that they enter. So this was kind of our saving tool in this one example of how we were able to solve for the problem that they had. So some other solutions and tools used here, because this isn't just the costing calculation, it's being able to query and filter their data inventory to make good informed decisions on guardrails that they're looking to replace throughout the state. Like I said, we used Esri Survey 123 for the planning questions and to replicate the Excel sheet. We have our costing calculation that runs in the background. We leverage dashboards and Experience Builder actually heavily in this application, just for the different strengths that each individual application has. The dashboards are so great for being able to filter and kind of drill down on your data. And Experience Builder has the really nice ability to be able to display and export from tables, which both of those things they needed to be able to do. So let's get into the demo here. So this is what the application looks like from the home screen in the start. This is a story map template where you can have different tabs here of all your different applications. And the first one is just a homepage that kind of gives an overview of each tab and some instructions for the planners as they're going through, because you figure they have a season of planning where they're doing everything at once. It's not always happening, frequently throughout the year. While the construction season is long, typically a lot of the planning happens beforehand. So, if they need to refresh their memory on how to use the tools, they have this homepage here. The first main tab of the application is a web app builder, and the whole purpose of this is for them to be able to query and filter their inventory to see what different types of rails they have in their specific district. So if they know that they're going to be replacing a certain type of rail or targeting to replace a certain type of rail, they can filter down the data and view the areas, export it out if they want to kind of see and field verify what's out there. And this has been really helpful for them in kind of targeting for budgeting, even to know how much to ask for in the next or upcoming year, of saying like, hey, I know I have a lot of this type of rail that we're looking to replace. So I want to be able to use that kind of going forward. The next tab of this tool is really the main basis of how they're going to start planning out. Get some of this preloaded. So you can see they have a whole list of filters here. So they can filter by their maintenance district. If they have a town specifically that they're looking in, a route number, an existing type. If they're building off of a specific project number, so if they're building off of something that already exists in their planning inventory, or even right down to if they have the individual INV ID or inventory ID that they're looking to plan for. So when you're totally zoomed out, you really just see the entirety of the state. But as you kind of get in a bit closer, go further out, you can see these little dots here where we have planning projects already started to give an indication of, hey, this is an area I'm already working in. And as we get a little bit closer, our barriers kind of pop into view here. So they can either do this by using the map view or by using this list view here to kind of select on something, zoom to the area, and bring up their pop-up. So what's really nice about this is in the background of the web map, we added some custom scripts in the web map to be able to give them a lot of leading information. So because our guardrails and our end treatments are related, even though the end treatment information isn't stored in the guardrails, you can use a custom script to pull the information from each end treatment into your pop-up of your guardrail. So now when the planner opens this up, they can see everything that's here, the existing type, the length, so they just get an overall idea. They're not having to click through a bunch of different screens or, however it's easiest for them to look at. If in fact there was something already planned here, they would get a little text right up in this top portion that says, hey, you already have a project that's going on here, so don't replicate the work that you've already done. In this instance, there's not a project right here. Looks like they dropped a pin here, not already starting from an actual rail. So that's something in the vicinity that'll show up when we look at it in the survey in a moment, but not necessarily on this individual rail. Then they have two options. They can click here to plan or click here to open a Google Maps. So if they just want to verify their location, this is just going to bring them to the exact location in Google Maps. They can use Street View, take a quick look, and then move forward. So let's open up the planning survey here, and you can kind of get a look at what this is set up to be like. So because we started this based off of a feature in this list here, we're pulling a bunch of information and pre-populating as much as we can in the survey 123 window from the link. So you can kind of see that up here. All of these and equals statements are pulling in the information. If they're starting just based off of no location, they're using this click here to plan, but they're not using a pre-existing location. They don't have the benefit of a bunch of things being pre-populated. So in this instance, our location's already preset for us because we're using it off that existing map. And there's going to be less questions that they have to go through and fill out for their planning project. It's a 5-page survey 123 setup. The first few pages are the planning, and then the last few pages are just for if they have any additional information that they want to collect with it. So say they go out in the field and they have a bunch of field notes that they want to enter in, there's a space for them to either upload a document, they could type in the text or snap a quick picture of it and attach it to the survey. And then really the last page is giving them the totals of everything, their breakdown and what have you. So we can just kind of scan through this first page here. This is kind of a neat feature we used. If they're doing a new survey, it gives them a number automatically for the project number. But if they select existing, there's a little script that we added in here that pulls any project number within a 10-mile radius, which is probably a little bit wide for what it needs to be, but we figured it's better to start broad and we can always narrow down if that's what the need of the project is. So they can kind of already select if they're looking to build off of something that already exists. For this example, we'll say they're looking to upgrade, scroll through to the next. And then they'll go through and fill out all the rest of the questions here about planning their future project. For the sake of time, I think maybe we'll just show some of this quick, but this will be the last page. So the barrier they're looking to replace, they select their overall type, they add in all their different components. This is all dynamically set on the background. So if they say, oh, I want 1 unit, it already knows the length of that unit's 50 feet. They can add as many as they need to in here. And everything kind of pops into this table down below so they can see the lengths, the ordering of how they're planning, the rough estimates per contractor, all the information that they kind of need to take into account as they're going through this process. And then their end treatments as well. So if they plan to replace and what the types will be, so on and so forth. So for this example, we can just select off this list and you can see in some instances, depending on what I pick, the select list will be different. So because I selected proprietary here, we have all these different attenuator systems. If I select non-proprietary, the list is slightly different that you get that comes up. So they would go through, they would submit the rest of the pages. There's a bunch of required questions, so they can't just skip on through. They have to answer all the information they'll need for the costing. Eventually, once they finish this, they come back in here and they open up this next tab, which is reviewing and planning features. In here, this first tab, they can go through. If they need to change anything that they've already planned, they can do it by selecting a line item in here and then click to edit planned rail. It brings up the survey that already has all the pre-populated answers. And if they need to make changes, they go through, make their changes and resubmit. The next tab in here is for the status. So everything comes in as pending status. Once they know they're going to move forward with that project, they send the status to approved. Or they could also set it to removed if they don't want to see it on the screen. They know that maybe it's not something they're going to use, or maybe it's not something they're going to use this year. So those are the options in this window. And then finally, once their project is all set, they'll use this export window to go through, select their project, and then use the actions to export to CSV. And what's nice about this is it's going to give them their final roll up that they need for their purchase order to export out and submit to the vendor. So coming back in here, we went over the inventory to planning process. So now taking it back from the planning and then back into the inventory. Oops. And so this is what we're currently working on. I've been working with the Aegis team at the DOT to kind of finalize this workflow. And what that's going to look like, we'll open the application back up here, is this final tab here, constructed. So after all their guardrails have been constructed, they'll come to this final screen here. They'll grab on a location here and hit this button up at the top. This is going to bring up a new Survey 123 window. This is actually built off the same feature class that the first Survey 123 was built off of, so we can pre-populate a lot of information in here so that they can review everything they initially planned for the project. Then down at the bottom, they're going to have some questions to answer based off of what was constructed in the field. So if everything aligns with exactly how they planned it out here, and if the location of the rail, assuming that they planned something that already existed in the inventory, exactly aligns. So say it hasn't shifted within 10 linear feet of what was there already. What we're working on now is an FME process that's going to go in to the existing inventory, decommission what was already there, and then recommission a feature, both guide rail and end treatment, that's the same length and the same location, but now is going to have the new information from the planning survey that they populated to kind of auto update the inventory. The catch with all this is if constructed is no, or constructed is yes, but the location is no, so the location is different. Maybe they merged two rails together, maybe it's shorter, maybe it's much longer. If something on a larger scale changed, then it'll trigger a manual review. But the amount of times that happens per year is, that's not the more common case. Is the feedback that we've gotten from the maintenance planners. Usually a lot of things are in-kind replacements or slight shifts, not large-scale shift projects. And in that case, we would want someone to go through and manually review and make sure the locations are correct. But even if that's the case, they're going to have the basis of the survey with the type and the lengths and everything approximated to go through and all the information that's been collected to update that inventory. So now you can kind of get a better idea of how we're kind of taking all that manual effort that I talked about in the beginning and push that into now a process that almost keeps itself auto updated, with the exception of large scale projects that need a little bit of manual review to be added into the inventory. So with that, does anybody have any questions?
Great presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Okay, if anybody thinks of anything later on, you can always reach out. I can leave my email in the chat if anybody's interested about more of the processing that we did here, or any of the applications we used, or just kind of some of the tips and tricks that we use for Survey 123 to kind of get it to be more dynamic and make it as user friendly as possible for the end user.
All right, thank you. That was great. Next up, we'll be hearing from Mark Hoover from MetroCOG, who's going to be talking about Bioswales in Bridgeport.
All right, thank you. I'm actually going to be having Hannah do most of the presentation. She did most of the work, so Hannah from our office will be kind of leading it, and I'll jump in for a little bit. But for those of you who don't know, I'm Mark Hoover. I'm the GIS director at MetroCOG. And Hannah, are you able to share your screen?
I am. I'm just pulling it up right now. Awesome. Thank you all for having us today. My name is Hannah Regley. I'm one of the regional planners at MetroCOG. And Mark and I have been working on the Long Island Sound Future Funds flow project, which I'll get into. So a little bit of background about the National Fish and Wildlife's Long Island Sound Future Fund. It's a grant opportunity that supports different projects throughout the state and New York in order to promote and restore the health of the Long Island Sound. Since it began in 2005, it's restored over 800 acres of habitat, and it's reduced over 206 million gallons of water. So long-term impacts of this have been substantial and really beneficial. And last year, actually 2021, we were approached by a couple of the nonprofits in the area about putting together a grant for the Bridgeport area to try to work together to restore and protect the sound. So that's really where the need and the issue arises. As many of you might know, a lot of the watersheds within a lot of our different cities encounter different stresses, and this can be due to several different topics and issues, such as public policy and planning decisions, as well as historic designs of different pipings that overlooked natural waterways and kind of went against the way that flows naturally go. There are many different options and efforts that we can do to restore and capture some of this natural processes, and bioswales are one of those, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So getting into it, how the Flow project came to be. As I mentioned, some of the nonprofits in our area, such as Save the Sound, the Nature Conservancy, and Lots of Fish, as well as Groundwork Bridgeport, are working together on this project. We were granted in 2020, early 2022, to do several different aspects, to plant trees in the community, create street art that encompasses water protection and resources, and then of course to plan the potential nature-based solutions, which is really the meat of where MetroCOG is helping out. And this is all to address the water pollution in the Bridgeport West End and West Side. So for a little bit of overview of what bioswales are, I know we come from all different backgrounds and may not have the same topics that we're all interested in. So bioswales are essentially gardens that allow water to percolate down into the soil and essentially capture some of this excess water that's on the road. They reduce the flooding instead of letting it pool or stand in one spot. They also provide beautification to the city, and of course, they provide food and homes for pollinators. There are several building considerations for bioswales that we have to take into account before we even get started in the planning process. A lot of them need to have a slope so that the water runs into them and stays as long as possible. If it was just flat, the water just wouldn't naturally go in there, and it would be quite an expensive looking garden. Of course, we do need to have the proper types of soil and plants as well. No different than planting the right tree in the right place. We have to select the right plants for the environment, and this plays into soil as well. If we had a lot of clay in there, we wouldn't get that retention of the water as much as if it was more of a mixture. And of course, maintenance comes into play as well. These are costly to keep up and maintain in terms of they do require some human aspect labor, going in and weeding, replanting plants that may not survive, and so forth. And so getting back to MetroCOG's role in the project, initially we were tasked with conducting the GIS assessment to find the sites that would be most suitable in the West End, West Side area for bioswales. And several considerations needed to be taken into thought, and this was kind of devised from our group of all those nonprofits and different agencies. Save the Sound had worked previously in New Haven doing a similar project, so they brought a wealth of knowledge of what worked there and what didn't work there. And we made sure that we needed to have areas that have over 25 feet of unimpeded area and that were within 50 feet upstream of a current catch basin. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Mark to talk about some of the initial GIS analysis.
All right, thanks, Hannah. So like Hannah mentioned, our first task was trying to winnow down kind of the current number of catch basins in our study area down to a more reasonable number for field work. So the idea was to kind of have a smaller number that we can have volunteers and staff go out to do a more detailed site assessment, which Hannah will go into in a little bit. So the first part was to do kind of this general GIS analysis to try to find those areas that are wide enough, long enough, and near a catch basin for a bioswale. So for this analysis, we used our 2013 planimetric data. So we had road pavement, sidewalk, catch basins, and a street inventory, which included signs, poles, fire hydrants, things like that, that we wanted to find areas where we didn't have kind of those impediments to the catch basin. So in the study area, we had a total of 277 catch basins to start with. So the first thing was the width analysis. So what we were looking for were areas adjacent to the road that are wide enough for the bioswale and a new sidewalk. They didn't want to extend past the current sidewalk, even if it was in kind of in the right of way. They didn't want to be perceived as, tearing up people's lawns and things like that. So we wanted to find an area that was wide enough within the current sidewalk and any kind of grass strip between the sidewalk and road. So we took our road pavement. So here's a look at our pavement lines, and the red is the sidewalk polygons, and we buffered them by 10.5 feet. Then we pretty much just selected any sidewalks that were not contained within the buffer. So like I said, these could include the grass strips and the sidewalk and the road. So here's our 10-foot buffer. You can say some of these areas have these red sections that extend beyond the buffer. So we included those as those are potentially wide enough for our bioswale location. And then we went through and kind of manually reviewed these sections just to make sure that it was, the sidewalk and the grass strip and that the planimetrics were accurate in these areas. So once we did that, the next thing was to calculate the sidewalk length. So just to mention real quick, the red stars are the catch basins from our planimetric data sets. And so in this area, we had already gone through and kind of selected the areas that were wide enough for a catch basin. So the next thing we have to do is to find an area that has 25 feet of unimpeded sidewalk section. So that means there's no signs, there's no poles, anything that will impede the construction of the bioswale. They don't want to have to go and, move a pole and place it somewhere else. They want to make it as simple as possible. So the first thing we did was we clipped our sidewalk center lines. So from our planimetric data, we had created a multimodal network several years ago. And for that, we created sidewalk center lines based off of these polygons using FME data interoperability. So the first thing we did was we clipped these to those selected sidewalks from step 1. Then we took our impediment layer, which was all of the different signs and posts, and snapped them to these center lines. And then we used a split line by point tool to split the sidewalks by the impediments and selected any areas that were over 25 feet. So you can see here we have the yellow points, which are the different street inventory. And then after we do the split line by point, any sections that were over 25 feet were, still suitable and moved on to the next step. So here's the last section of step 2 processing and the ones that are still suitable. So the last step for kind of this general GIS analysis was to find suitable areas within 50 feet upstream or upslope, I guess, of a catch basin. So the idea is we want to catch this rainwater that's coming off, have it diverted to the bioswale before it goes into the drain and out to Long Island Sound. So we buffered each catch basin by 50 feet, and then we clipped the center lines from step 2 with that buffer and selected areas that were still over 25 feet. So that reduced the number of potential areas as well. The next thing, which was a little trickier, was to find which way was upslope of the catch basin. So for that, we did have, our LiDAR data. So we used the street intersections as a point and extracted the latest LiDAR data from 2016 to get an elevation. And then we used that to kind of manually go through the neighborhoods and select the areas that were upstream of the catch basin. Isn't ideal because there could be obviously more than just a standard slope from one side of the street to the other. But this was kind of the best method we could use at the time. And a lot of these areas in the West End are very flat, so the slope is very small. So you can see here, from the west, we have an elevation of 19.09, and to the east is 18.11. So then we were able to select the areas in purple here. So these are the catch basins that had those areas of 25 feet within 50 feet upslope of the catch basin that were wide enough for a bioswale. And that reduced the number of catch basins from 277 to 123. And then we were able to kind of use this winnowed down catch basin for the field work, which Hannah will go into now.
Awesome, thanks, Mark. So once we completed our phase 1 of the project, we were able to get into creating some sort of form that volunteers could take out into the form to site these potential bioswale locations. In doing this, we used ArcGIS field maps. If you're not familiar, it's an online application that uses our maps and creates mobile forms so that we can perform things such as capturing data, editing locations in the field, finding assets, and reporting those real-time locations. So diving into it, this is what it looks like when you open up field maps in Arc Online. As you can see on the right-hand side, we have our layers. The completed bioswale data is where we started our initial form creation. So we wanted to ask a bunch of different questions that would be presented to users out in the field. And through the form builder, you're able to kind of drag and drop your choice questions in there. And you can do things such as integers or open-ended questions or create very specific answers, which was really helpful in terms of creating a form that's extremely user-friendly and also able to be repeated for different studies as well. An example of that is, what is the curb type? So we knew that there were only going to be a certain amount of numbers of different types of curbs that would be applicable, such as asphalt, stone, or concrete. And of course, another option is always helpful in case there's some like janky wooden one that's left there. So this was really helpful as well. And of course, with field maps, you're also able to create a logic within them. We can make them editable, we can make them required, and we can turn off their visibility as well. Most of the questions that we had were required because even if there wasn't a true answer, we wanted those to be recorded, at least for our back end when we're creating maps at the end of this. And one thing that we wanted to be very conscious of was we didn't want to overwhelm volunteers when they're out in the field with a bunch of unnecessary questions. So one of the questions that we did have is, what is the number of impediments that is at or around the catch basin? And we created 12 of these different types of impediments. We didn't think necessarily there would be more of those at a given location. And this can include things as fire hydrants, trees, driveways, and so forth. But we wanted users to be able to fill out the number that they were finding of the impediments, and then based upon that, a series of questions would be given afterwards. So within the expression builder of field maps, we were able to create a wicked simple code. So in this instance, we have, based off of that question of what is the impediments, we wanted to have at least X amount of numbers so that then afterwards, there would only be a certain amount of questions that would show up. And they wouldn't have to keep filling out not applicable or zeros. And in the right-hand photo, that's how it would look in the field, which we'll get into as well. So a little bit of back-end work of what folks were doing in the field. These were volunteers with Save the Sound, and some of them were earning college credit, some of them were getting a small stipend. And they went through a pretty intensive training session with Save the Sound in terms of seeking out the best potential sites for bioswales. They learned some really cool tricks of determining elevation, kind of field testing what Mark and I had done back in the office. to see if these were actually good sites. Of course, they learned about different trees in the area, if certain street furnitures are able to be moved fairly easily, or if they would be really difficult, which would, of course, deem a site not worthy. One question that we did have in field maps at the bottom of the sheet was if the site would be a good location for a bioswale, which is kind of an interesting one because, of course, they're collecting all this data, but these folks become the experts who know how to cite at the end of it based off their training. So that question does hold quite a bit of weight in determining if this site would be valuable or not. In the fields, folks were starting to help us learn how we could make the app better as well. One team had determined that they would really like a notes section in the app so that if there was something unique about the site, they could just enter in so that both they would have the data and we would have the data at the end as well. And this is what it looks like out in the field. So when they were in the field, they would bring iPads out and we configured the app so that they would be able to take it offline as well, which worked about 70% of the time. Sometimes they would need a hotspot, which luckily they were able to use. So I would say that the offline portion of it could be challenging at times. But walking you through it, these are the selected sites on the far left, indicated by the stars. And when you're out in the field, you can zoom in and find your location or snap to it. And once you click on one of the stars, you'll select to collect data and the bioswale siting will start. So you're able to take a photo of the actual location. Here's the catch basin down below. You can see already that we have some impediments that are visible. It looks like we have a street sign and then some trees as well. We're also indicating when we did select the site with the date of collection. And of course, it's not always 100% accurate with the data that we receive. So the question of is there a catch basin present was important as well, because they were able to tell us if some of this data was true or false. Moving down the line, when folks were able to select the impediment, we had a list of different impediments that might be visible based of our knowledge. And that list grew over time as well. When people were out there, they were finding that there were a lot more than just the simple bus shelter, bench, fire hydrant, light pole, and telephone pole. So that list grew as well with things such as trees and so forth. And so I wanted to talk briefly about the other aspects of the project that hold a lot of weight as well. We're doing tree plantings in the neighborhood as well for residents of the West End or the West Side. They're able to request a free tree and they become kind of a caretaker for this tree as it's starting to grow for the first 3 years. We've been hosting different events for tree planting days and education where Save the Sound and the Nature Conservancy will take you out and teach you all about how to plant the trees, the type of trees, and so forth, which is incredible because these also obviously have a impact to stormwater control as well. They're able to take up some of this excess water. And there's been a strong focus on community outreach and engagement. And this is through an agency called Lots of Fish. The woman who runs it, Joanne, she's an artist and she outreaches into the community by hosting different paint days. And as you can see in the photos, they make some beautiful artwork. And this is aimed at having folks simply reminded that these drains do go into the Long Island Sound and have an impact on our water. So to keep trash out and keep the area clean as well. They actually just hosted 2 days ago an outreach event at McGovern Park in Bridgeport, where they had residents coming through. They were creating one of these murals and an education of the program and that bioswales might eventually be here and the benefits for them. It's been really important to get the NRZ involved as well so that there is a strong backing for some of these potential solutions. So the next steps for the project, the Bioswale siting had started in mid-April, and there was initially the goal to site 60 of these locations by the end of June. And by the end of June, they actually had 85 vetted for potential sites, which is fabulous. You can see in the map in the middle, we created a quick map of the sites based off of their information, whether they would be suitable or not suitable. And once the project is kind of wrapped up, we're going to be putting together a story map of different maps and information to go along with the project. And it's going to be submitted to the city of Bridgeport for review and next steps in discussing the potential for implementation of some of these bioswales. We're going to have to do a little bit more back-end work for creating some of these maps. Something that we've discussed in our last couple meetings is that it would be a lot easier to put some of these bioswales in certain locations, such as local roads rather than state-owned roads. And of course, finding the right dollars to do some of this implementation work will be challenging. So I think the next map that we're going to be creating is putting these bioswales on either, we're going to put in a layer of the local or the state roads if possible, to limit some of those down and find really the easiest sites for implementation to sell it a little bit harder to the city. And then of course we've provided the project team with their canopy map as well to determine some of the areas that they might want to focus on plantings in the future. And if Mark has anything to add, that would be great. Otherwise, we are happy to take some questions. All right, well, I will stop sharing my screen.
No questions? All right, thank you, Mark and Hannah. That was great. Let's take a quick 10-minute break before the next presentation, just to go to the bathroom and get some coffee, whatever. And we'll meet back at 11. Okay. So next up, we have David Cook from Fuss & O'Neill, who's going to be talking about lead service lines.
Thanks, Sarah. So today I wanted to talk to everyone about some work that Fuss & O'Neill has been doing, partnering with water service providers, primarily in Massachusetts, and very similar to the MS4 mandates that came down from the federal government and the EPA, where urbanized areas had to map and track their stormwater. This is focused on service line materials that may contain lead. And this really is coming out of the Flint, Michigan water crisis, and the whole issues that were presented there with really aging infrastructure and not knowing what materials are in the ground and not being sure the quality. It's just, these pipes have been there for so long. The records span decades, primarily are paper records. And what we want to do from the EPA's standpoint is to identify any lead lines, remove them, get them out of there, and make sure nobody is being exposed to lead in their drinking water. So it's a great project to be involved in, but it comes with some massive data logistic issues. First off being that any water service provider that has records, they're going to be most often hard copies at their facility. So there's no great way to map and identify in bulk what the materials are, the age of them, when they were installed. So part of our process was to scan all the hard copy forms and then go through them and digitize them. So for each municipality we're doing it, it's around 10,000 cards, or actually 10,000 accounts that are, people being served by this water. There may be like 3 or 4, they call them swing or tie cards, where they do the swing ties to the curb stop, because that's buried and it doesn't really have a marking. There may be at least one, possibly three generations of scanned documents, or we scanned them and we had to name them and then digitize them and make them into a searchable database. Was the best way to do it. So for each town, how we kind of tackled this is Massachusetts has a great program. It's a dollar for dollar match, so that if it's $100,000 to do this project, the water service provider can apply for the grant, provided that they meet some requirements. The requirements being, most of the work or majority of the work has to be done by, businesses that meet a certain criteria, whether that's, woman-owned business or minority-owned business. So Fuss O'Neill is not one of those companies that fall into that category. So we teamed up with outside team members to help digitize this work. So the scanning process was all outsourced, but a big portion of you can imagine this work is going through record by record and digitizing it and transcribing what was written on the cards and putting that into a spreadsheet. And just to give everyone an idea, and I'm sure this is not uncommon for people here to see, but the tie cards, that's why they call them ties, because they're doing a tie, swing tie from corners of the building and some other, maybe a telephone pole. And this is what we were dealing with. No great way to consume this information and put it into tabular form other than putting eyes on it and deciphering the written information. This one's not so bad. One of the problems that we came across some of these cards is cursive. And, I'm 35 years old, and, cursive was definitely part of my curriculum growing up, but I haven't used it since I was second grade, and I couldn't tell you what a B or a J or, the capital letters look like. And for a lot of our staff who are, younger than myself, cursive is something that, generally I think is excluded. It's something we don't come across, especially now in the digital age where everything is typed. No one's really doing hand script. So deciphering, chicken scratch and pulling out the information for, what is the line, what's the service line made out of. This one we could see, I don't think has anything good noted on it. It's very difficult to pick out, and that was a time-consuming process. Up here, a little bit easier to read. At least we have a date, and that's a good indicator. So one way we have been able to kind of filter out whether or not a service line is unlikely lead is if it was installed after 1987, when there was the lead ban for water and lead soldering. So information that we were trying to pull out are, installation date. Certainly, if there was any type of information of the pipe diameter, sometimes that could indicate whether or not it was a lead service line, galvanized line, clay pipe or steel. So this is information we're looking at. So back to the kind of the data management issue was, how do we get 10 team members to simultaneously go through this? We had a shared drive of all these scanned folders or scanned tie cards that were named based on whatever was on the card. So ideally the name of the file was close to where the mapped parcel address we were trying to identify was, so we could kind of associate the scanned cards to a physical location. How do we get 10 people working all over New England to, chew through this data in an efficient manner? And, one of the best ways, I thought initially was to, we'll host all this stuff in OneDrive, and we'll share it out, and we'll divvy up the accounts and say, like, Joe Schmo, you've got accounts 1 through 1,000. Whatever the address is, go find the property card, or the tie card, grab the information, update Excel. And we wanted to use Excel because we didn't really have the luxury of having like 10 editor accounts for ArcGIS Online. And just from past experience with having a lot of people with access and editable rights with ArcGIS Online that may not be GIS users, it can get a little dicey. So we thought everyone knows Excel, we'll make a nice Excel template, we'll share that and make it standardized. So the data entry was done through Excel and then ported over and joined up to a point layer for ArcGIS Online, a feature service. So here's an example of what we were doing. We kind of hard-coded, pre-populated the billing ID, the parcel ID, the site address that was attached to the CAMA record, and the most likely tie card names. That kind of gave them a quick starting point of like what the file, if it existed, was likely to look like. And we had them fill in the file location. And you know, kind of the thought behind this was when we want these tie cards to be accessible in the pop-up because we were going to be hosting a suite of web maps and web apps on ArcGIS Online for public consumption, also for the water, the water service providers, are their system of record. We want to digitize that for them, and so since everyone has like their own little OneDrive link, you can see mine's C drive, users dcook, OneDrive. We just wanted them to copy in their local path and then use some nifty scripting when it gets pushed up to ArcGIS Online, just to look at the basically just the file name. So we would remove find and replace in ArcPro, and remove find and replace all this characters up till the last file name. The other thought was, we could do that whole make the feature service have attachments, enable attachments, and do like there's some tools where you can have a list of all your your JPEGs, your PDFs, and associate them to an attachment table of the hosted service. But when we're dealing with 10,000, 20,000 PDFs and JPEGs, having that hit the ArcGIS Online credits, because it's going to look at the size of the file and it's just going to count against you every hour, every month. We thought, let's just host it in Amazon Web Service. We created an S3 bucket and we uploaded all the these tie cards there. Again, the relative file path, we can update the script if that were to move from Amazon S3 back to the water service provider. We're just going to have the whatever that prefix is, we can readjust and make that the web app point to the new location of those files, while also saving credits and dollars for the hosting fees, because with Amazon S3 you can choose your tiering for how quickly you want images to become available to view. And I just checked the metrics on the S3 bucket for one of our accounts. It was like $5 in the hosting fees for the month for 30,000 attachments. And part of that equation is people aren't really accessing, you get charged on the calls to these resources. So, the application that has little pop-ups isn't really getting used a lot. Like you might see, you go check the map for what the status of the lines are, but no one's going in there and crawling through your website and hitting every attachment. So the costs are relatively lower. But from back to the Excel, we tried to standardize the data entry. Since we have 10 people working on it, everyone has their own ways of inputting data. We did data validation in Excel, so we created drop downs. And that way, everything that was inputted into Excel also matches the schema in ArcGIS Online. And that gets, that's important because we found that Esri has a phenomenal solution for lead copper service lines. And so if you haven't checked out the ArcGIS solutions, you definitely should. How Fuss & O'Neill kind of works with our clients regarding ArcGIS Online, we're not going to host our, the service on ArcGIS on, we're not going to host a service on Fuss & O'Neill's server and grant access. We're going to, get a creator level account on the existing ArcGIS Online organization that a lot of these, water utilities have. And if they don't, we would create one for them, create an organization for them, spin that up. And with the solutions, the scheme is the same. So we can replicate from one town to another, use the same Excel input spreadsheet and update, the respective water services ArcGIS Online. And at the end of the day, they're going to own everything. They'll have their own ArcGIS Online. They'll have all their own web apps. And, us as Fuss & O'Neill, we just help them create, so we're an extension of the solution process, essentially. So super cool. And I played around with a solution or two before, and I was impressed, like the tree management and the electrical utility. And I really liked what I saw, but what was, really striking. So this is a view of the ArcGIS Online solutions, what it creates. And I was a little bit overwhelmed because there's, I don't know, maybe 60, there's a lot of items that it creates. So 30 items it spins up. Each one of these has its own, predefined, expectation of use. So you start with the feature layer that was created, the service line. This is split up into like 3 or 4 different views. So the solution already does the view for you. And from those views, the associated maps, and from those maps, the associated web app. And, this is pretty cool because you don't have to go in there and create these views and maps. The way this project is sort of set up is we want public engagement because there's information out there that we don't know. And we want the public to tell us if they have access, what material of the pipes coming into their house. And one way of doing that is making a hosted view where they can access the information but not edit it. We also have editors in-house that can access the information and edit portions of it. So, I was really blown away by the solution because I think if I were to try to do this myself, even if I had a schema established and I could replicate, just going in and creating the dashboards and the maps and the different views and how they're shared out would take a significant amount of time, days most likely, with the high possibility of me messing up something and it just not working. So from our perspective, this was a great solution. We were able to duplicate it for, I think we had like 5 different clients doing the same thing. So it's very consistent. We have access to each one of their ArcGIS Online environment. And, it was really just awesome. I mean, like a time saver, and really makes the clients look good too, because they're able to show this to their community, and the community has some faith that, this is being addressed, this is what they're working on, and you can see the progress as it's going along. Part of the whole issue with the identifying the service line material is the way it's represented on the tie cards. So this is a cross section of what the service line, this water service looks like. So you got your big water main going down the center of the street. You may or may not have a gooseneck. So goosenecks, I found out, historically used to be like lead or galvanized, some soft metal, and it would look just like this. So that way any settling that was going on in the roadway wouldn't break the pipe, and you could maintain that connectivity from, the water main to the pipes in your house. So this is actually something we were trying to look for on these tie cards. Sometimes they were represented by a little squiggly mark on, someone just drawn like an S at the connection site. Sometimes they were called out as goosenecks. In Massachusetts, this doesn't qualify the service line as being lead, but for many of these municipalities, they want to know that so they can go and replace it. There's actually two sides of the pipe that we need to know. So, this is a service line and you've got your curb stop in the middle. This is where the water utility company can come in and turn off the service to your house for whichever reason. And, so the way water lines get installed, you could have everything up to the curb stop installed. And then when the developer comes in, they tie in to the curb stop. So there might be different generations of records of, the material on this side of the curb stop and the customer side of the curb stop. So in the database, we're looking to populate both those material statuses, whether they're known to be lead, unknown, unlikely lead, is it plastic? And all that goes into the figuring out of, at the end of the day, in 2024, any unknowns are assumed to be lead, and the water service provider is responsible for, one, having a plan to replace those, and providing clean water, usually in bottled form, to these residents. So it's really important for the water service provider, not just from getting lead out of their lines, but also from a cost standpoint, to know, to eliminate any unknowns. A lot of times, the water service provider might feel pretty confident that, yeah, it's probably not lead, but if it's not known, if it's not documented, the statute says that it's unknown, it's assumed to be lead. So taking the most conservative action. So a lot of these unknowns will be treated as if they were a lead service line, and that triggers a lot of cost on the water service provider to replace and also provide clean drinking water, usually in bottled form, to the home provider. So this is the hub site that was spun up from the solution that we are hosting for our clients. And this is intended to give the public an idea of what's going on, to let them get a pulse on the progress being made, but also the ability to chime in and provide feedback on what their service line is. And the reason for that is, you can see there's a lot of unknowns, and how this map is set up is, this is after we did our first cut of digitizing the property cards. If any portion, the customer side or utility side, is unknown, this graphic shows as unknown. And what we found is most of the unknowns are on the customer side. So the easiest thing for us to do from a cost standpoint is to target these homeowners, give them a link, and say, can you just go in the basement and do a scratch test or confirm, take a picture that this is or isn't lead. And so we do that by, we've got a QR code. We include this in mail stuffers that go out with the billing to the residents, but also on this website, we can click the link and it will bring up our Survey 123 form. Again, this is spun up by the solution. I did some slight modification to the form just to kind of, give better context. We included the utility bill here because we want them to give their bill number, just one way to join it back to the GIS, the address. So this is a geocoded function in Survey 123, and we found that it's a world geocoder. So if you put in Main Street, you have to pick the right Main Street. So one kind of clever way is to create a row in Survey 123 that doesn't bind. It's just a kind of there's no schema attached to it, but it's just a form, an empty form object. And so here we put in A, and it's going to hard code to Franklin, Massachusetts. This is the hard code, and they click that, and then boom, that's how it gets geocoded to, Main Street in Franklin rather than Main Street in God knows where in the United States. Trying to, make this data collection painless and cost effective, and get the information we need. We provide information of, locating, where it comes into the house, what lead might look like, what galvanized might look like. And if you still need help, we've got a link here that opens up it's a mail to link. So it goes to the person, we've got a subject, and in the body has prompts for them to fill out their information and then photo. So all this is to, really cut down the unknowns. And this is another dashboard we've got, again, configured by the solution. So saving a lot of time, and you can go through here and see the unknowns. So we've got verification status, 9,000 accounts, and we know that 8 of them are galvanized, 0 are lead so far. That's great. However, the unknown is 3,000. And so that's still a big number. That means 3,000 lines have to either be replaced, or 3,000 customers need bottled service, and we have until 2024 to get that unknown down. And we're going to try to do that by public input and looking back at when they might have reinstalled the upgraded the service lines with record drawings. And we also looked at we joined the CAMA data. So if a house was built after 1987, the cutoff date for lead installments, we could, with good faith assume that there's no lead there. So that's not an unknown, that's a likely not lead verified by, and we have qualifiers to say that the reason why we're calling it likely not lead is because the CAMA data, the year built. And so they're able to go in here and, they can see all the gooseneck locations. We can see the unknowns. And again, this is showing unknowns on both sides. So really, really slick solution here that as we put up, I'm super happy to have found it and stumbled upon it. The other cool thing that, so a little bit of reverse engineering whenever you spin up a solution is trying to put together the puzzle pieces and see how everything works. And I opened up this map and I was like, how are they, styling these points? And no, it's not this one, it's this one. How are we assuming, the lead, assumed lead galvanized, because there's 2 sides of the point. You see here, this is just kind of like, there's looking at 2 fields. Everyone has seen that in ArcGIS, how you can pick 2 fields to show. This one was just 1, but there's no one category that does this. So I looked at this expression. This isn't a public lead category. And I've used some arcade here and there for different things, but this was, this kind of, at first threw me for a loop, had to do a little bit of reverse engineering. So what it's saying is, it's looking at the features field, utility status, customer status, utility source, customer source. So it's looking at 4 fields and presenting you with point objects for, 5 points. So we've got different statements here that if the status is equal to lead and the utility source is equal to installation record on tap card, or so it's kind of fun. That was new and interesting for me, and now I know quite a bit more arcade than I did at the start of this project. So just interesting that the solution was complex enough where it's got this really cool arcade thing script going in there, and it actually wasn't exactly what we intended to do. So I got in here and updated it so that it was looking more explicitly at the conditions we wanted to call lead, unknown, and others, and to update that. So that was pretty cool. And yeah, I mean, the clients, they're super, the water service providers, they're really excited about having this put up for them. We've trained them on how to update information. And here's, so here's the pop-up information. So interestingly, we started with PDFs as the tie card system of record, realized that PDFs don't work in pop-up, so had to bulk convert everything in AWS from PDF to JPEG. The file name's the same, but the script, the arcade script expression here appends JPEG to the end, and then that's how you get the pop-up. But when you click on it, it brings up the PDF. So this kind of interesting way of reducing costs for the client, using the solution with some other tools. Microsoft with the collaboration for the external people with OneDrive and having a Teams channel was super helpful. Having data validation in Excel also paramount to data collection. And then the solution was really a home run for us. So we've been able to spin this up and really makes what it's like a super high-end product for a client. Actually, in reality, was not a whole lot of time for myself and the GIS people to spin up and configure. So a great tool. Take a look at the solutions, because if there's a need that you're looking for, just save yourself the time, spin that up and tweak it rather than starting from scratch. With that, I think that's my time. So if there's a question or two, we can get into it. Otherwise, I got a question. Was the arcade script used to symbolize the point based on multiple fields? Yes. So it was pretty cool. Multiple fields. So it's looking at all these fields and making conditions for, you see lead, 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 lead. So I've never seen that. It was interesting. And it wasn't always the same logic. So interesting for sure. Kind of scratching my head for a little bit. And with that, I will kick it back to Sarah.
Okay, thank you for that. That was super interesting, super relevant too. Next up, we'll hear from Alfredo Herrera from the State of Connecticut GIS office for some state updates. Alfredo, are you here?
I don't see his name in the chat. Maybe is that? Oh, see, look at your little baby.
Oh, I'm still on camera.
I don't see Alfredo, so maybe didn't make it onto his calendar.
I was
So
talking
anyone
this
from-
morning. He should be here. Let me just chat him real quick.
Yeah.
While we're waiting, I saw there's another question here. So from Nick, notice those account numbers could be used as an indicator of possible lead, or definitely not lead if they're assigned sequentially. That is super interesting. Didn't think of that. I'm going to take a look at that, because that would definitely be helpful if there's a cutoff date with years. The unfortunate thing is some of these accounting, as we get into it, working with the water departments, not all the data records are logical like that. I'm not sure when they made account numbers, so it could have just been by street or however, but that's definitely something we didn't look at, and I'm going to take a look at it, because that would be super, super helpful. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, can you hear me, David?
Yep.
Another thing, if you have GIS data for it, you may be able to, possibly get some information by the material of the mains that they're tapped on. So it really kind of depends on the company policy. So like we had a policy that said that, if if we upgraded a cast iron to, a ductile iron, main, that if we noticed that there were lead, then we would upgrade our piece, the company portion of it. So we knew that if there was ductile iron, it was not lead. They wouldn't tell us anything about the customer side, of course, and we never really tracked that. That's kind of a new issue, but I guess, are the metering people also collecting that information when they visit a meter that's in a house? Because they could like check those real quick when they were there.
Sometimes they are. Unfortunately, it's just been like they haven't been tracking it in a proper way or an easy way for us to use in all cases. But yeah, for the main replacements, that was the second cut as we went back to the water provider and they looked at their records and said like, oh yeah, we did have a replacement here, whenever. And, we were able to kind of take out streets and say, utility side doesn't have lead. But it's still, a couple thousand records to go through. It's it's a process.
Best of luck.
I think Alfredo just popped on.
I did, yes. Sorry, I'm late.
That's okay. Take it away.
Oh. I entirely forgot what I was talking about. I'm sorry. I get a reminder? I think I totally spaced out on what I'm talking about today.
Whatever state updates you have for us.
Oh, okay. Yes, that I can talk about. So state updates, the biggest and most exciting one is the imagery. We have received the pilot data on the imagery. It is frankly amazing. The level of quality, I mean, I suspect, it's one of those things like, the imagery looks really, really good. It looks like what you'd expect it to look like. The other thing that I would say is that, like the building footprints look great. They look like what they should look like. Same thing with the 3D buildings, also quite amazing. I think the thing that is really going to be a standout for this data set is the LiDAR elevation data, the DEM, the contours, the point cloud itself is, in a word, phenomenal. I don't have anything quite prepared to show off yet, but I'm sure in the coming weeks I'll probably send an update to the group through the listserv on, kind of some screenshots to kind of, show off a little bit and, show what we got and, give everybody a taste of what's coming. Cause, frankly, like the contours alone just are so much more precise based on the additional density that we asked for. It's quite amazing the difference that going from 2 points per square meter makes to going to 20 or 15 even makes. It's in a word, amazing. Beyond that, the parcel data collection, unpacking all of that and getting through the data is going really well. I will say the data has improved significantly, even from last year. The compliance on the CAMA side is very, very high, and those that didn't comply still have enough information to be useful. I think we were only missing about 15 or 16 towns on the parcel side, but what we did receive is still pretty good. Additionally, we're making good progress on the master address layer. That is coming along nicely. I think the biggest point where we are now is we're collecting address data sets from various different state agencies. and is so that we can do a validation process to kind of create a confidence interval in any particular address. And then we're also trying to make sure that as we go through this, we have a kind of like we're still looking forward so that we can make sure that as we go, we can figure out a path for how we're going to maintain this data going forward and be able to keep it up to date so that we don't kind of get into a place where like, yeah, this is great, but it's out of date. Like we're not trying, we definitely don't want to do that. Yeah, so I think those are probably like the big highlights. Short of that, I think some of the other smaller projects we're, still working and making updates to the geodata portal. I think the one thing I would ask the community is please use it, please link to it. If you feel it's useful, add it to your own local or private website so that we can have links. We're working on the search engine optimization because I think that's like the biggest challenge that we're facing with it right now is just it's hard for people to find it. But beyond that, I think we're in pretty good shape with it. We just need to make sure that people can find it, people are using it, and that if you see an opportunity for feedback, please provide it. There's a number of surveys on the site that you can use and or just email us, either me or the giso.opm@ct.gov. Yeah, I think those are like the major the major updates from the GIS office that I can talk about.
Does anybody have any questions? Nothing? Oh, there we go.
Yes, buy-ups are available. I can add in the chat the email of the person that you can reach out to. So you can just reach out to Dewberry directly. The particular point of contact is Sri Ratnala, and he is more than happy to help you out. So the estimated release date is expected to be sometime early next year. Because we're getting it incrementally, we may be able to release it incrementally, but we're still working out those details. The entirety of the data set is due November 30th, and that is all of the imagery, all of the LiDAR, all of the building footprints, et cetera, with the exception of the 3D buildings. That's the only thing that we will not receive likely until January of next year. But the entire data set will be fully published by that point. Classification issues, we have come up with some QA/QC criteria for internally, and then we have a very open communications process with Dewberry where like if we point anything out, our plan is to kind of, as we receive deliverables, check them against our QA/QC criteria that we've developed. And I will also add that this criteria was developed after a series of conversations with both Mass GIS and New York State GIS. They both had lots of really great insight and lots of good experience in kind of figuring that out, and that was really helpful to us to kind of develop the evaluation criteria for us to either accept or reject or correct any issues that come across. Any other questions? Yes, everything will be hosted on the geodata portal through CTECO. It'll actually be a combination. Everything raster will be going through CTECO. All of the vector stuff will be going through the geodata portal natively. The LiDAR and the DM will either be incremental as they come in, or and the whole thing, once again, it'll be all available most likely sometime in December or early January. We need time to process and get it all hosted and all that stuff. I think it ends up being like somewhere in the order of magnitude of like I think for the LiDAR data, we're looking at, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, it's like, I want to say it's like around 12 terabytes. The raw imagery is about 47 terabytes. We're obviously not accepting the raw imagery because that would be insane. We have nowhere to put it. But I think even like the compressed imagery is still going to be quite large in the terabyte range. So there's a lot of data. It's really, really dense, and it's you know, big fat piles of stuff. Yeah, like I said, I mean, I think just to reiterate, like with the timelines, we will be getting the data incrementally as they process it. Excuse me. So I think, you know, we will try to kind of stay on top of publishing it and just appending as things come in. But we want to make sure that what we put up is correct and it looks right and all of that. So we, you know, like we don't want to kind of rush to put it up and then have to like change things and then have things be out there that are incorrect or incomplete.